basically what we've done is we've surveyed our audience about the things that matter most to them, and particularly how they feel about politics in general. And the answers were pretty grim. 89% said that they didn't feel inspired, and 93% said they didn't feel represented. Why do you think that number is so high, and why so many people don't feel like they belong to Australian politics?
Well, it's a really interesting question. I think it's an increasing phenomenon that people feel disengaged and disenfranchised by politics. And if you look at younger people in Australia, they've got lots of reasons to feel that way. If they actually look at what's in front of them, it's pretty confronting. So you've got climate crisis and the fact that Australian politicians haven't been dealing with that. Economic crisis, we've got an ageing population, narrowing tax base, so younger people are going to have to support people of my generation when we get old, but they're also being told that, you know, they're never going to be able to afford their own home at this rate because of poor policy decisions that have been made in the past. Plus, they've been presented with huge HEX bills, and you know, it's just it's crisis after crisis, none of which are of their making, but all of which they're being told that they're going to have to sort out. And so, if it was me, I'd sort of say, "Yep, thanks, no." There's a bit of yeah, no out there, I think, basically.
Yeah, it definitely does feel like a lot of our generation have had to pick up so many pieces and then make the best of it, and that's really tough to do. And I think that's why so many of us just think, well, we're not being represented properly and we don't have this ability to, you know, use our voice. But I wanted to know from your perspective how you suggest we do have our voices heard and get involved in politics.
Well, if you go back to, you know, way back when, to, you know, the American Revolution and the whole question of taxation without representation, you shouldn't have to pay tax and you shouldn't have to contribute to the cost of things if you don't have a say in the decision making around them. You know, it's a core democratic concept. So what I would say to young people, I've said it a lot in the last few years, and it's something I've kind of done myself, is if you're really pissed off about something, if you're not happy with how it is or how things are going, you can either stand by and be cross about it and have no effect. And powerlessness is in and of itself actually really quite depressing and anxiety generating. Or you can stand up and get involved and put your hand up and say enough, you know. And that's something that I did in becoming a politician, purely for my own mental health, because I was getting so frustrated and so angry with how the government was. And that's what young people should do too. They should get, you know, don't just get angry, get activated and do something.
Yeah. And as, you know, quite a historic independent winning a seat, how do you, I guess, suggest that young people do that with so many barriers already in place for them to go into politics? I know when we went and spoke to some university students, they said that they felt like they couldn't afford to even run a campaign on top of their Hex Stats, the rental crisis and the like. So I guess, how do you recommend young people circumnavigate that and break their way through to politics?
I think it probably really helps to find support, external support. So when I stood for Kooyong, I was picked by a group that had decided they wanted to run an independent candidate in Kooyong, and then they went looking for somebody, and they crowdfunded for the ad that went in the paper that I responded to, that led to me being picked as their candidate, and we started crowdfunding from there. And it turned out to run a federal campaign against, you know, an incumbent treasurer. That's really expensive and it takes a lot of organisation. But for other people, not so. It depends what you're running for, obviously. But you kind of have to crowdfund for your support. But what I have found, and I was surprised by it, I didn't expect it, was that a lot of people said, we're really keen for a change. And a lot of people said, look, I'd love to do something myself. I'd love to do more. I'm not in a position to do that, but what I do have is the money to help you do it. And so people are actually really happy to put their hand into their pocket if it's something they really believe in and they want to see happen.
You were quite instrumental in raising awareness and bringing change to the Hex Stats, and especially advocating for a lot of students who were struggling. And we spoke to a lot of students who, again, were really affected by unpaid placements and dealing with so much of their money going towards Hex. Why was that something that you were particularly wanting to advocate for?
Well, it was really interesting. So it was not an issue at the last federal election, and it's become a massive issue in the last 18 months as the cost of living has really bubbled to the top of the list of people's concerns. And I think that's because inflation all of a sudden was much, much higher than it had been before. And then about last February or March, we realised that people with the Hex debt were about to get hit with this massive indexation of what turned out to be 7.1% in the end. And when people saw that coming, they thought, huh? And that sort of then drew our minds to a whole lot of other issues around the Hex system. And we've started to address those, but they're by no means fully addressed now. But people came to me, and they came to me again and again, and it's the human stories and the people's experiences and telling you about how these things are affecting them, the choices that they're making, that really brought it home to me. And I think maybe people don't necessarily understand that if you're a federal representative, you are responsible to your electorate. Now, if you don't listen to them, they should vote you out. But if you are listening to them, and if 3 people come to me and say, look, I really care about this issue, I'll go, okay, no worries, fine. But if 50 people come and talk to me about it and say it's a real problem, then I think, gosh, I need to do something here. So it was sort of the bulk of people coming to talk to me about it. And also people of my age, I have 2 kids who are tertiary students, and I was seeing their Hex debts, pile up. And a lot of people my age hadn't quite realised how bad it had got. So we just had to get our head around it. And once we did, it was clear that it was an issue that we had to step up on.
Were you happy with the result of the $3 billion wipe of the Hex debts? And do you think that there should be indexation on the Hex debts at all?
Yeah, so look, I was really happy with the change that we got. You can't look a $3 billion gift horse in the mouth. So for us to get a $3 billion win, yeah, it was great. And the progress that we've had on unpaid placements is not enough. It's nowhere near enough. And I know there's a lot of people who aren't getting the help that they need, and we need to keep pushing on that. But it was a definite step in the right move. There's still a huge amount that needs to be done. And one of the nice things about it was that, when I was elected, people said, oh, you're just a crossbencher and you guys don't have the balance of power. You'll never get anything done. But this was a real proof of concept. You can get something done if you know how to put the pressure on the government. And we've learned a lot, I think, all of the community independents in the time that we've been in Parliament about how to get a result. And it was like, look, guys, we got a result here and we're only just starting. We're all learning how to do this. And it was not just for the elected representatives, it was for the people who support us saying, oh, okay, actually, yeah, they can get a result. And I think a lot of people are like, ew, which is great. So it's just the start. There's a lot more to do on Hex, but the fact that we can demonstrate, I can list the multiple changes that I'd like, but the fact that we've got a demonstrable response from the government in the way that we did is really encouraging.
And even from the budget, you made a video saying how you wish the Labor government had raised fossil fuel taxes. Why was that something that you had particularly hoped that they would include in the budget?
Well, the situation with fossil fuel taxes in this country is, it's ridiculous. It's crazy that if you live here, we make $88 per citizen per head a year out of our fossil fuel taxes. If you live in Norway, it's $16,500. All of these things that we should be able to afford as a wealthy country with extraordinary mineral and oil and gas resources, when we can't afford, because the government's essentially giving it away for free. So last year, the government budget figures last night collected $1.1 billion in the super profits tax off the gas industry, but at the same time, it's budgeting for $14.5 billion in subsidies related to the fossil fuel industry. So, not only are we not getting the tax dollars that we should, we're actually propping up the fossil fuel industry. So it's not just the climate impact, it's also the fact that we could pay for more job seeker, more youth allowance, more Commonwealth rental assistance. We could increase the age pension. We could pay for better Medicare and for cheaper drugs and for aged care and childcare and all of those things if we just got a reasonable return on our finite resources, which were allowing multinationals to dig up and take overseas and sell at huge profit. So it's infuriating that the government isn't stepping up on that, and it beggars belief. You think, why aren't you doing this? It's the most simple and obvious solution to all of these budgetary challenges that we have.
I mean, speaking of the budget, Labor government has been criticised for boasting that they're in a surplus when a lot of people are struggling. What particular areas, I guess maybe you mentioned a few just then, would you have liked that money like to actually go to?
Yeah, so I mean, you can't eat a surplus and you can't sleep in a surplus, obviously. And there's this real concern about inflation. We can't spend too much money because that'll increase inflation. The problem with inflation is that results in the Reserve Bank responding by increasing interest rates, and that makes life much, much harder for renters and for people who have a mortgage. So, 2/3 of us either have a mortgage or we're renters. The 1/3 of people who own their own homes is pretty sweet for them if interest rates go up. But we don't want that to happen. So there's this whole thing about, we can't have inflation, you can't have inflation. Well, the fact is you can spend money, but you can put it where it's most needed. And if you give it to the people who are really struggling and the most vulnerable in society, so those people who are on job seeker and Austudy and Abstudy and those people who need Commonwealth rental assistance and things like that, they tend to use it. It might be a tiny bit inflationary, but they do tend to use it on the things that matter, food and their rent and their power bills. Whereas if you take that money and you give it to people who don't kind of need it, so those people are on, really significant wages or who own their own homes, or you give them significant tax breaks, it's much more inflationary because those people just got free cash and then they can spend it on the big picture items.
Switching gears, back in November, you did face some criticism for supporting a humanitarian pause in Gaza. According to that criticism, you weren't adequately condemning the violence committed by Hamas on October 7. It seems lately that there's a conflation to need to, when you advocate for Palestine, you also have to condemn Hamas. What is your, perspective on that paradigm? And I suppose there's also a real push now to not conflate calling out what's happening in Gaza with being anti-Semitic.
It's an extraordinarily difficult issue, and it's so difficult to negotiate. And you're right, there is this expectation that if you speak to one side of the issue, you have to acknowledge the other, which I think causes frustration actually for people who are pro-Palestine and people who are pro-Israel. It's a very, very difficult one. What I did learn from what I did with the social media post that did get a lot of pushback from the Jewish community was I actually said after that, I'm not going there on the social media because you can't address these issues which are complex and difficult. I don't think you can address them with the sort of sensitivity that they warrant on social media platforms. And so I actually haven't done that since. Other than perhaps to say, I've put a statement on my website and to direct people to it. I haven't actually made comments around it on the social media. And it's such a sad thing that it's causing so much loss of social cohesion and so much division and fragmentation in this country. What I would say about it, I guess, is I think that much of that reflects people's feelings of powerlessness, which, is a common theme. Actually, whether you're Jewish and deeply concerned about what's going on with Israel, and many members of the Jewish community here have friends and family in Israel, and so they feel very deeply protective of that, or you're a Muslim and obviously concerned about the situation in Gaza. Again, many family members and friends and things like that here. The fact that you can't do anything about this terrible situation and there is a humanitarian crisis there. There definitely is. Makes people, I think, people's responses to the situation have been heightened in a way that isn't really helpful domestically. But it reflects their powerlessness and their distress about something which is a terrible situation over which most of us have very little control.
From speaking to our audience, it was an issue that they were really concerned about. And we went to the student encampment in UCID, and there were actually the concerns there from various sources of media that there was the fear of spreading anti-Semitism at the campus, at the encampments. And when we went there and spoke to a few, there were a few Jewish students who were part of the encampment. And obviously it's not, if you are Jewish, you're pro-Israel and vice versa, what you were saying. But I think that there's a real issue, as you were saying, that the conflation of the two makes it hard to actually advocate for the peacefulness of Palestinians to live, I suppose, and to correctly in a lot of people's minds, call out the Australian government and the Israeli government for, I suppose, creating a humanitarian crisis. A lot of people feel really angry about it, and they do, as you said, feel very hopeless about the situation that's happening. And I suppose with the encampments and all that anger, what do you suggest that people do with that? And where do you suggest that they take that? Is it protesting it? Is it bringing it to politicians to kind of have it front of mind?
Well, I think it's always, you feel better if you can express yourself and express how you feel and communicate that to people who I guess potentially have some influence on it. And so I'm very, I've been hearing a lot from my constituents. So as a local member, particularly as an independent, but just as a local member, a member of parliament, it's my responsibility to respond to the concerns and anxieties and questions and requests of all of my constituents. And I have constituents who are Jewish and constituents who are Muslim. And it's, one of my roles has been to try and to respond to them as best I can. And I have heard many, many times from those constituents since October the 7th. And it's a difficult thing because people want you to do things that you can't always do, because I feel my biggest responsibility is to my constituents, and they are telling me, well, I feel this way and I feel this way, and that I can't necessarily cover all bases for those people. But I mean, the right to protest is so important. It's so important, and I think universities and the focus point of that in this country. But at the same time, it's so important that Jewish students can also feel safe and welcome and valued and respected on campuses, and that is something that I hold very dear as well.